Hello, my name is Dave Bartholomew, and I'm with the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution at the State of Minnesota. Welcome to our presentation on Bridging Divides. This presentation is a partnership with the Association of Minnesota Counties, the League of Minnesota Cities, the Association of Minnesota Townships, and the Minnesota School Board Association. And it's all being put together here at the tremendous offices and studios of Sourcewell in Staples, Minnesota. There's two parts to this series, two about 50-minute parts. So please watch them both. And at the end of the day, if there's anything our office can do, let us know. Our contact information is part of this. We also have a handbook, so make sure you check out the handbook. So please enjoy the presentation, and thanks again to Sourcewell for being such a great partner. So today we're going to talk about stuff that really isn't easy to deal with. This is kind of tough stuff. We know you're coming to us today from cities and counties, townships, school boards, and other organizations. Some of you are elected officials, some of you are staff, but I think you're all probably hoping to learn some skills on how to get through this kind of contentious time that we seem to have for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about that, the polarization of things. And so I am Dave Bartholomew. I work with the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution at the State of Minnesota. We'll talk about that just in a second. I'm also a mayor, so I've kind of got a couple different hats that I wear, and I'm the mayor of Circle Pines, and sometimes that helps me to understand the kind of things people are going through, because quite often I'm going through them at a very personal level as well. So today, as we go through this, we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of having the pandemic as our background. You know, this is a good example of a divided kind of polarizing issue. And we know people are saying things on both sides of the aisle here and on both sides of the issue. You know, should people wear masks or not? Should schools be open or not? Should football games get played or not? These things are changing every day, and people have very strong opinions, and they make for difficult situations. So we're going to try to come back to that example as we roll through some of the different information of the day. We're going to be talking about how to deal with folks when there's a lot of high emotions going on. We'll talk about how to de-escalate people when they've gotten all worked up, whether that's a colleague, whether that's an elected official, whether that's maybe the public at a meeting that you're at. We're going to talk about what to do when people are upset. And one of the core things we're going to be talking about is the idea of underlying interests. Why are people so upset? So we're going to talk about that. And generally speaking, a lot of this gets to those very difficult conversations that either we've seen or we have participated in. So as Heather mentioned, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box there, and we'll be trying to monitor that as we go along. The first thing I'd like to do is remind you that we also provided a handbook with you today, about 38 pages. This has all the slides from this presentation in it, along with a lot of notes. And the goal was there that you could maybe stay engaged in the presentation a bit more and not be quite so tied into taking notes because you know they're available to you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to another poll. And that poll is a question of, the question that's coming up is, what do you most worry about having a conflict or conversation with? And so I'm going to put that up right now. And on your screen, you'll see that you have this question I have out there is, where do most of the people have a conflict with? You know, where are you most worried about it? Where do you see it? Is it with elected officials? Is it with the public? Is it with your boss? Maybe is it with a colleague or coworker? So as you fill that out, we'll get a sense of what folks are looking for today. And I just want to remind you that another reason I'm so glad to be able to do this with you today is that I see a lot of you, whether you're staff or elected officials, you're leaders in your community. And so as you look at these difficult conversations and have these conflicts, people often look to you for kind of being maybe above it all, or trying to help figure it out or solve the problem and stuff. And so as you go through this, we're going to try to be giving you some of those kind of skills too, literally almost kind of leadership skills, because that's the kind of things we need. So as I look for who do you worry most about, having a conflict with or a discussion with, it looks like quite a few with the public. You're worried about those public meetings, and then it's kind of split between elected officials and a colleague. So we have some of that kind of workplace piece along with some of the more general public stuff. And so at the end of this presentation, and there'll be two halves to this, at the second half, at the end of the presentation, we're going to be talking quite a bit about what I call public engagement. And those are those meetings where the public often comes, says some things that maybe are a bit outrageous, and the question is, how do you deal with that? One of the answers is a thing called reframing. So we're going to talk about how you reframe some of these nasty kind of questions. So again, thank you very much for answering that. Public is number one with having difficult conversations and conflict with. And then, yep, elected officials and colleagues are coming in tied for second place. So that's great. So what I want to show you is a little bit of why we're in this kind of a mess these days. You know, what are we facing here? And so here's what seems to happen in our public polarization. We're getting more and more polarized. So if I go look at this and I say, okay, let's watch how this happens. Here we are in 1994. Okay, you see this kind of typical kind of bell curve. Some people are more liberal, some people more conservative, but the majority of people are in the middle. That's how America has often been, except for during crisis like we're in right now. As that goes forward, you can see still staying pretty good, moving a little bit, maybe more to moderate. And then all of a sudden here, what happens is we end up getting much more conservative and much more of a split bell curve. You can see it right here. All of a sudden, now we're starting to go, and boom, it kind of rolls out, and it rolls out like that. And so here we go, 2008, that's, you know, quite a while back it seems like to us. 2009, 10, now look at this, look at what starts to happen. The middle Democrat and the middle Republican both get either more liberal or more conservative. And you can see that this goes out to right there in 2014 where that middle is getting hollowed out. So the Democrats are becoming a little more liberal, the Republicans are becoming more conservative, that middle is getting hollowed out. And that's a challenge because the middle is often where the action happened. And so now what we're going to do is start talking about why that's happening. Well, public trust, especially in the federal government, not so much the local level, but in the federal government is stuck at historic lows. So trust is important in any kind of relationship. Pew Research found that 55% of Democrats and basically the same amount of Republicans are afraid of the other party. A quarter of both Democrats and Republicans would support policies that harm the other party, even if they also harm their country as well. So you think about that, just wanting to get back at the other party like that, that's rough stuff. And here's a lesson for us throughout the day. That most striking is a false belief that held among basically 50% of Democrats and 50% of Republicans that the other party dislikes them simply because of their party affiliation, because they're Republicans, because they're Democrats. But in fact, the research shows that only 18% of each party likes that way. So it's the beginning of a story you're going to hear throughout the day. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation going on. So why is this happening? Rapid demographic change is happening all across our state and country. Globalization's having a big impact on our economy and obviously on diseases coming into our country with our pandemic. High levels of distrust, and trust is really what makes a lot of things work. And so if there's distrust out there, that makes it really challenging. Rapid disruption of the media. This is the social media and the things that are changing so fast about news. Instead of kind of being maybe more nonpartisan news, we have news for both different sides. And of course, the pandemic is having an impact on all of this. And so what's happened is that various identities we all have, such as being a coach, being a business person, being a mom or a dad, those things are taking kind of a lower level of importance right now. And their interest in their political affiliation, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever, is rising up. And that makes it very, very challenging for us. And so we have a lot of things we have going on that's making our life tough. So what can we do about that? Well, there's a lot. First off, the first thing we have to do is always appreciate that there are still shared values, right? We all still want what's best for our kids. We all want a good economy. We all want a clean environment. We all want a lot of things. We all believe in honesty and being thriftful and being all kinds of things to make our families and our lives successful. So we have a lot of shared values. We also know that we need to get to know people and their multiple identities, not just their political identity. So that state representative or state senator, that mayor, they're also a mom or a dad. They're a coach. They go to church with you. So we have to make sure, remember, to move beyond this whole idea of just one identity, because we all have multiple identities. We need to work harder to better understand, and you kind of see how that is bolded and highlighted. Understand, but not necessarily agree with, but we need to work better to better understand the views of the other side. Understanding helps people to be able to identify solutions, right? So we need to get to know people that are going on and everything, and we believe at the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution that we can do better at a lot of these things. That this whole self-defeating narrative of, oh, we're in such a big mess, it's terrible times, we're just sort of doomed, is not true. That we believe we can work through some of these things, and it starts with each of us individually. There's nothing magic to put in the water or spray from the skies over our communities. This starts with us, and we're really the first people and the front line people, and if we can do better, if we can model better, that's important. One of the best books on a lot of this that just came out recently is called Love Your Enemies by Arthur Brooks. And in there, he's got kind of 5 rules on how to help move through this. First off, refuse to be used, by a political party or whatever else, kind of hang on there, stand your ground. Escape your bubble. Go where you haven't typically gone. Talk to people, be open to issues and talking about things in a different way than you've done. Say no to contempt. This is one of Arthur Brooks's main points in his book, which is that we've gone past just not liking somebody or even kind of hating them or their ideas to contempt. Contempt like as in, I don't think you're worth anything, you and your ideas are totally worthless. Contempt is a real tricky situation. It's hard to get back from contempt. Another piece is that he believes that we need to disagree better. Now, I think some people are thinking we should just disagree more. We should be more civil. We should just get along. Well, sometimes that sounds like you're saying, well, let's just compromise, that maybe I don't have some strong principles I believe in, and let's just avoid these discussions. And he's saying, no, that's kind of not how a healthy democracy at a city level, a county level, at a school district level, township, that's not how they work, right? That steel sharpens steel. And that if we can start to have good discussions, have better discussions, we can still hold our ground, but we can still have a good discussion with people and not just avoid it. That's really important. So we need to not disagree less. What we need to do is disagree better. Be careful of the words we use, be careful of the way we're treating our people. And then finally, his 5th point of his 5 rules are to tune out. That sometimes, and you see the elections are happening at this particular moment we're taping this, sometimes you just need to tune out of all the things that are going on. Take a break. I see people that drop out from watching news channels. They might drop out from reading their paper. They might go off Facebook for a while. Sometimes you just need to kind of disconnect from things that are unproductive. Kind of the media and the debates and stuff. You just need to kind of put those aside for a while and rest up, because this is kind of a personal journey. And you also then need to dialogue to build that common ground. That's what we're going to talk about today. And develop integrative solutions. A solution that takes some of one person's and some of the other ideas on both sides and kind of integrates them. We are being given what's called a false binary. We're being told by our friends and our foes in this political divisive time that we have only a choice. It's this or that. You're for the economy or you're for the environment. It doesn't have to be that way. we can find solutions that work and cover both of those things. And so that's the discussion we have to have. That's the thing we have to do, is push past these kind of what they call false binaries. So we have in our office a 5-step problem-solving process. We're going to be covering a lot today, and I want to have this as sort of a base for you to be considering. That in this process of solving some problems and having these tougher conversations, a couple things that are important. First, we want to develop a problem-solving mindset. We're going to get into that shortly, where you look at these things as an opportunity to solve problems. And how do you do that? We want to then engage in some dialogue. Yep, it could be a little rough. It could be a rough and tumble time. But we're going to treat people well in that. We're going to listen better, but we want to engage in that dialogue to learn more. We don't have all the answers. The other side's got some answers too. And we can work through these things. And then after we've done that, then we can start generating some options, some real open options, and then try to see if we can't weave those together into this thing we call an integrative solution that integrates some from each side, and then try to reach an agreement. And that process of trying to listen and learn better, of having a good dialogue, of trying to generate some options, I'm not saying it's going to work each and every time. But if you do that in a manner of respect and listening and being thoughtful and considerate, you can start to at least maybe improve a relationship rather than continue wrecking one, and you're building grounds for things down the road. If you don't get an answer to this tough problem, at least you've started a path so you know how to deal with those in the future. So today's objectives are to increase your ability to learn what to do when emotions run high, to de-escalate some difficult situations, to work with difficult people to clarify their positions and interests. And of course, I always smile whenever I think of difficult people, because we all have somebody in our mind we're thinking of. And the truth is, they might be thinking of us in the same manner. So we work through that. To identify what people need to move forward. What do you have to have here to move forward, to move off of this and to solve this problem, and then develop those solutions that integrate all the pieces together. So when we talk about managing this kind of conflict that we're in, that we're talking about today, we're going to break it out into these chunks. First off, understanding conflict, getting a little better sense of what's going on and why this is happening. There's an awful lot of exciting new work being done in this, and brain research of what happens in our brain when we start getting into conflict. We're going to talk about how you build that problem-solving mindset. We're going to talk about interest-based problem solving, where you try to get to the underlying interests, not just the positions, you're for something or against it, but why? Asking those questions, learning those things. We're going to talk about emotions and identity. And, as a Norwegian Lutheran from Fargo, North Dakota, I had not dealt with emotions much. I tried to avoid them for many years of my life. And then I started getting into this interest of conflict resolution and things, and you realize you can't just avoid some of these things. You really need to kind of deal with it and understand it, both your own emotions and identity and the people you're dealing with. We'll talk about some communication skills, and I think you've probably all had some of that before, where you're talking about not listening very well or being unable to communicate, but we'll go through some points there I think that'll be valuable. And then we'll kind of wrap it all up in this problem-solving process that we described before. So that's kind of what's in our world today. Now a quick little 30-second commercial. This is who I work with, the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution. We're located in the Minnesota Department of Administration. We use collaborative processes and the science of human relations to help government and stakeholders improve relationships, build trust, and develop wise and more durable solutions to seemingly intractable issues. So we work on a lot of the toughest public policy issues at the state and sometimes local levels, and we develop a lot of resources, and those resources are at that website right there, and it'll also be on the last page. Our OCDR website is really helpful. So I want you to make sure that when the day is done, you know where to reach us. We have a slide at the end that shows our names. There's 2 of us in the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution. It's a large operation of 2. And my colleague Mariah Levison is in charge, and she's wonderful. But we will do a lot of work with the Association of Minnesota Counties, the League of Cities, and others. So we're really glad to be here and glad to see how we can help you. We're doing a lot more in the training and development world. So first off, here we go. Buckle up. We're going to talk about understanding conflict, getting kind of that base of what's going on here. Some of this you may know, so we'll kind of roll on through it. First off, here's the question for you. What I want you to do right now in the chat, if you could, is answer this question. When I say the word conflict, what's the first word that comes to your mind? It's kind of like that old name association thing. So I say conflict, you say boom. So put those into the chat right now if you could. That first word you think of when you hear the word conflict. So as you're entering those in, that'd be great right now. We'd love to see it in the chat. So we're looking for some answers as they're coming on in. Yep. Okay, great. So keep that coming along. I see discord, I see stress, I see adversary, argument, disagreement. I saw war. That's a big one. A lot of that disagreement and fight and everything else. What's interesting about that? Well, the interesting thing about that is I looked down it. I just saw one word that wasn't, but they're almost all negative. Okay? So now what I want you to do is I want you to think a little harder and think about a positive word for when you hear conflict. So I see somebody says resolution. Exactly. And so put your positive words in there. The interesting thing is you had to be asked twice, most of you did, for a positive word, because we when we hear the word conflict, when we feel conflict, we think negative. We think this is a problem. This is a drag. I don't want this to happen. I want to click my heels like I'm in the Wizard of Oz and go back to Kansas. But you can't do that. The research shows that just avoiding conflict, there might be about a 10% chance it goes away. There's a 40% chance that it gets a lot worse, 45%, and there's a 50% chance it stays the same. The truth is you have to deal with conflict. So people talk about hearing other people's opinions, being able to work out a problem, being able to think outside the box, learning more information, learning some new things about a policy issue or disagreement that you never even thought of, okay? In our office, we talk about the fact that we see conflict as a perceived incompatibility of interests, needs, goals. It's perceived. You think that there is a incompatibility, that what they want and what you want are opposites. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. One of the things that the research shows is that's not necessarily true. That it could be that it is impossible, but in many cases, if you start to listen and learn and talk with folks better, you're going to understand where they're coming from. And when you understand where they're coming from, and vice versa, now you're starting to build the base for possibly solving a problem, right? And if you can be that kind of person who asks the questions, who tries to figure out what's going on here in a good, fair, and open way, sometimes you can open up a window there for solving a problem that avoiding it or being kind of negative and being in a fight doesn't help at all. So what's going on in conflict? What's underneath? What you see on the top of that iceberg, might be the hollering and the yelling and the name calling or nasty letters to the editor or whatever is happening. That's what's happening in the conflict. But underneath there's a lot more. And that's why conflict is so darn tough to manage, right? Because there's a lot more going on than what you see, okay? We're talking about emotions. We're talking about somebody's view of the world, a view of a glass half empty or a glass half full. All kinds of unmet needs people have. They don't have the information. They don't have the resources, whatever. Lots of things that go into and underneath a conflict. So what we have to do is start trying to figure some of those things out. We have to understand that somebody is just afraid that their needs aren't going to be met. that the kind of things they hope to have happen aren't going to happen, and so they're angry, and so they get into conflict. And we'll talk more about kind of how that works, especially in a public setting down the road. So there's a lot more going on. So if you look at this, it's kind of like this whole idea of understanding human needs, right? That there's this hierarchy of needs, that at the bottom you're looking at basically having some shelter, and being able to have some food and some safety. And then as you move up the ladder of your needs, you start wanting to belong to a group. You don't want to be that isolated person who has no friends and isn't involved. You want to feel good about yourself. So that's the path that every one of us is on. And those things are happening in people's heads. And I've got a lot more information in the handbook about that, because this is a very good, deep area. And you want to make sure you're comfortable with some of those kind of pieces. So that's in your handbook. In addition, there's a lot of things that people need. And some of this really ties to the workplace. So when somebody talked about a colleague, and getting along with them and some challenges in the workplace. What do people need? They need to feel appreciated. They need to be tied into a group. They need to have some autonomy to make some decisions on their life. They need to be able to be a little bit in charge of that. We'd all like a little status. We'd like to be able to fit in. We all need to have our role. Again, lots of points and lots of needs in the comments there. But sometimes understanding these needs and what your staff, if you're a leader, what your staff have for needs can make you better understand why there's this struggle. What's going on? Maybe it's just somebody doesn't feel appreciated. They don't feel understood. They don't kind of see their role in the team. They don't know how their stuff fits in. So again, we're going to continue to go back to a lot of those things about trust and team building, but people have these needs. And as you start getting into it, the challenge for you is going to be to look around a little bit and try to think about, what am I missing here? What are people needing that I'm not currently providing? So let's take a minute to recap understanding conflict. It has a lot of positive elements to it. You already know the negative elements, but there's a lot of positive pieces to conflict that give you opportunities to get something finally resolved. Get everybody on the same page, work together better. Conflict is about perceived incompatibilities, that you're thinking something isn't possible, but it might be. That emotion and worldview and unmet needs are big drivers about that. So, keep in mind that we're using the chatting we're trying to do when you're looking for answering questions. You use that Q&A box. That's our questions, where you put your questions and comments. And one of our main features is that you have to have some underlying needs need to be addressed in order to effectively deal with conflict. So we have one question, what if we have a staff member that cannot communicate with employees in a manner that brings about, being more productive and stuff? And that is a real challenge, right? Communications, being able to effectively communicate your needs in kind of maybe more of a positive manner, that's a real challenge. And, sometimes people end up being in positions and they don't have as many good communication skills as they do. One of the nice things about it is AMC, the Association of Minnesota Counties, League of Cities, they have a lot of courses online and learning about that. The other piece I'll say is that if throughout here you end up with something that maybe didn't get quite answered, my email's at the end, and I'm looking forward to having you shoot me an email. Because being able to effectively communicate is really key. We're going to talk about communications, in fact, in just a minute. The next piece up is a problem-solving mindset. Okay? Now, a mindset is a belief that orients the way we handle situations, the way we sort out what's going on and kind of why. Okay? And so I always like to use the example of Sherlock Holmes. If you've ever seen the movies or the new versions of Sherlock Holmes on public television, Sherlock Holmes is a detective. He walks into a room, he looks around, he notices everything. He's a detective. He sees that somebody's shoes are muddy or this or that. That's what a mindset is. We see a lot of use of the term mindset from a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, used in a lot of athletics, a lot of things about whether you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. So we want to try to help you develop a problem-solving mindset. And these are developable. You can grow yourself. This isn't something you're born with or not. So the bottom line is a lot of information coming into you, and your mindset, unknowingly, your mindset kind of helps direct your attention to the most important pieces. Okay? That helps kind of suggest some sensible goals and some paths. And so what we want to do is remind you that people will say, give me the skills. I want the skills to really be able to handle conflict better. Give me a checklist. Is there some sheet I can have in my purse or my wallet that I can pull out and just go down and ask these 5 questions and it fixes everything? Well, the truth is that what Mariah and I will tell anybody that listens is that you really have a hard time using skills if you don't have a problem-solving mindset. So you're going to want to get one, and we're going to talk to you about the difference between your maybe your current mindset and a problem-solving mindset. So the traditional approach, what you're kind of thinking of how you solve problems and deal with things, in those your goal is to win. In a problem-solving mindset, it's a little different. It's a wise outcome, So it's not just that I want to win and a winner and a loser. It's like we want a good outcome here. In a traditional approach, the people in it are adversaries, like a football team. I'm not going to bring up the Minnesota Vikings or anything at this point, but like a football team, they're adversaries. In a problem-solving approach, you know what? A lot of times we see where we can get those other people to actually help us focus on the problem, not the people, not the emotions, focus on the problem, and actually become joint problem solvers with us. So if I want to build some new community center and the other person does not want to spend the money or raise the taxes, can we work on this together to solve this problem? There's a need for a community center, but we can't have a big tax hike. So how do we do this? Let's work on that together. In a traditional approach, you're seeing a lot of this today now with a part of our political discourse. You're attacking the problem and the people. In a problem-solving approach, we really want to concentrate on the problem. That's what we want to focus on. Okay? In a traditional approach, you're assuming negative intentions. That person's out to get you. That person doesn't care. That person doesn't care about kids in the community or something. Well, what we're telling folks all the time is, listen, could you please just take a minute, take a time out, pause, and assume a positive intent. You really don't know that they're so negatively intended. There's very few people that actually wake up in the morning thinking, how can I make this a terrible, lousy world? Now, they have some things going on in their life that maybe may cause them to act in a way that you don't like. But let's give people a break and presume positive intent, just starting out that way at least. In a traditional approach, we focus on the position. I want to shut down the schools because of COVID, or I want the schools totally open. Okay? Those are positions, one or the other. What we're saying is let's talk about the underlying interests, and that's going to be a big part of what we do today. Talk about underlying interests. Why? Why do you want the schools closed? Why do you want the schools open? Under what circumstances would you do one or the other? So the underlying interests are absolutely key. Traditional approach, we assume that, I assume I'm right. I've been working hard at this. I've run the numbers. I've looked at this. I'm right. In a problem-solving approach, you need to take a pause again. There's probably a lot of pausing here if you can't tell. Slow your mind down a bit and assume that you need to learn their story. I'm not saying it's going to make perfect sense to you. I'm not saying you're going to agree with it, but you need to learn their story. You need to learn where they're coming from. Traditional approach, you come with the solution right now. It's do this or that. In a problem-solving approach, you have some ideas about a solution. There's no doubt about that. We're not talking about you giving up everything you've ever done in your life, but we're saying in this case, you are willing to explore some options. So when you're developing that problem-solving mindset, remember some of these key things. Okay? That the goal is a wise outcome, not a win. You want to become joint problem solvers. You want to focus on the problem, not the person. You want to presume a positive, not a negative intent. Give people a break. Even though I appreciate, based on their past behavior, they may not deserve a break. Let's give them a break. You need to understand their story first. And this is a really big key point. You need to understand their story and where they're coming from. You need to identify then and then focus on the underlying interest. What is it that makes them the way they are? What is it that makes them want this position or that position? Those underlying interests are key. And need to be curious. One of the things probably bigger than anything else is this idea of being curious. Curiosity and being willing to explore some options. That's absolutely key. Okay? So, as we go through this here, we've got some questions coming in, Does the other side also need to have a problem-solving mindset in order to reach a cooperative solution? Well, Jack, that's a really good question. The challenge is that like in a lot of things, you may have had training, you may have gone to something, you might have read a lot of things, and somebody else hasn't. So their worldview, everything they're thinking of might be sort of smaller than yours. So they may not have had the problem-solving mindset. It'd be sweet, but a lot of times it's just going to be you. The only person you can really control is yourself, And somebody else asks, is possibly part of each of the approaches. What's good or bad to that type of mindset? And I think that's a good point. This is aspirational. A lot of what we're talking about, a lot of what you see in the handbook is aspirational. This is a goal to reach. We're not there. I'm not there. I mean, I can sit and tell this, and I'm back at a city council meeting, and something happens, and boom, I just respond. And all these lessons learned kind of seem to slide. So we're all on this kind of personal path, this continuous growth kind of thing. So yeah, you're probably going to mix and match, and you probably put in as much as you can, and then be reflecting on it. Think about, boy, I wish I'd have done that a little different, So here's another question for your chat right now. What do you see in this picture here? Okay, there's a picture, and I'd love you to put in the chat what you're seeing in this picture. Okay, enter in just a 1 or 2 word description of what you're seeing in the picture. And as we wait for that to come in, I want to tell you that what can happen and what the point of this particular picture and the next one is, as you put up your answers there, is to start laying the groundwork for understanding that different people are seeing different things. Okay, so one person sees, I'm seeing some answers coming in now, one person sees a couple by the lake. Somebody else says a baby. Okay, so and the truth is, yes, if you look at the script, at the picture there, you can see there's a baby there. And then if you look again, you can see the picture of 2 people standing by a lake. Okay, the message here is that different people are seeing different things. It is the same picture, okay? But we see different things. Here's another one. Put this in the chat. So what do you see when I show you this picture? Okay? The message here always is sort of that, you know what? You can have differences of opinion. You can look at exactly the same picture and see different things. That doesn't mean the person is wrong. That doesn't mean the person is evil. It just means that you're seeing different things. And why is that important? Because when you're in a discussion on a policy issue, on some sort of a conflict in the office or with the public, just remember that different people can look at the same set of statistics for COVID. They can look at the same sort of statistics for financials, and they can see different things. One feels like we're in great shape, another thinks that the sky is falling, okay? And it's the same kind of facts, right? So that's a real thing. And when we can start to see that people can see something different than us and still be a good person, then all of a sudden we're on the path to being able to say, you know what, this is something I can work with. So for example, some people are seeing a bunny and some people are seeing a duck in this picture. Different people seeing different things, and the trouble is that just because they see, if I said to everybody, hey, everybody who sees a bunny, I'm not working with you. This is clearly a duck picture. No working with you. I'm done. You're out of my mind. Well, that's not going to work very well, right? So let's take a look at thinking about how that perspective kind of rolls out, because this is one of the most important slides in the whole group today. That being able to see someone else's perspective doesn't mean that they're right or that you agree with them. I think a lot of us, we don't want to really listen to somebody else's views and hear all their points, because what happens if we started to agree with them? Heaven forbid, we'd be flip-flopping, right? The point is that what we want to do is we want to ask the questions, we want to behave appropriately so that we can try to understand their perspective more. So it's not meaning that we're going to agree with them. It simply means that you are willing to acknowledge that it's the experience of the other person, and it's true for her. So, you see a bunny and I see a duck. I'm not going to say you're wrong or foolish or stupid for seeing a bunny. We just see things differently. So now let's acknowledge that and let's start to work through some of those kind of points. Another thing that happens in this game is a thing called the truth assumption. Again, a lot of materials in your handbook about this, but it basically means that too often, right out of the chutes, we get stuck arguing about what happened and who is right. And of course, always thinking, based on our perceptions and our hard work and our knowledge and our learning, that we're right. We just naturally assume that we're right, that our side is the truth, the other side is not, it's fake. Okay? One side or the other side. It's just that way. And what we need to do is we need to get beyond this kind of truth assumption. We need to say, you know what? I know that I have some strong beliefs, and I know I've done some hard work. And so I think I have maybe the right answer or a good answer. But what I need to do is, instead of just saying that and saying, you know what, I know this, I've been down this road before, here's your answer, let's just skip this whole discussion. Instead, what we need to be is curious. We again need to be curious about their story, what it is, and how it makes sense to them. And then we need to look at ways to embrace both stories. You're right. We do need those schools open because the kids need to get together and the kids need to play football and the kids need to learn from each other and stuff. But it can only happen in a safe environment, because if all the kids get together and start spreading the disease around town, this is no good either. So we have to find this way to realize that both sides have very important points and very important interests. How can we work that together? This is like democracy 101, right? This is how we do things in America. So what we have to do is be able to remember that there's always things going on, that we come in with our own world thinking that we're telling the truth and our path is the right way, and what we're really talking about is trying to figure out how to learn from some other people of what they're doing. To recap this, we want to develop that problem-solving mindset, that idea of listening and questioning some of your assumptions and trying to understand their story. Having that be like a detective where you're trying to learn what is it that's going on here. You want to be able to see the other person's perspective. Now, that's hard if they're hollering or swearing at you and stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this idea that knowing where they're coming from, asking them questions. Okay, so tell me a little more. We're going to see that later. That's 3 words that we use all the time in our office. Tell me a little more. I need to understand this. I don't really know what's going on. Okay? And remember the truth assumption that we are always assuming we're right. And maybe we are, right? But that doesn't help us to work with somebody else. We need to fight through that by getting curious, asking them questions, being open, in a sense almost like a Brene Brown vulnerable. Listen, I don't know all the answers. I've got some pretty strong ideas about this, but I'd like to know what you're thinking too, kind of being that patient, being that humble person that kind of gets through that. And seeking to understand their story. I need to learn a little more, so help me. Okay. Our next section is on interest-based problem solving. And if there's one thing you're going to take away from today, I hope this could be it. That there are underlying interests, that people have things going on behind that statement they're saying to you. Again, if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. This is the picture that kind of describes interest-based problem solving, which I appreciate sounds like a lot of jargon. The truth is you have an issue, whether it's COVID, whether it's building a new community center, whether it's fixing up roads in town, whether it's, doing hybrid school versus distance or whatever it might be, you have an issue. And then below that are 2 positions typically, or sometimes more, but 2 positions. Either build that community center or don't build it. Fix the roads or put it off for another day. So we know the positions. We see those. Those are what's on the billboards and the yard signs and everything. Vote no, vote yes. But underlying that is the key to this. Underlying that are these interests. Why do you want that position? That's what we're going to talk about, right? So let's take an example of community center. So if I'm thinking it'd be great to build a community center where the kids could come and maybe some activities and things going on in town, and somebody else on my council might very well be saying, oh, no, hold it here. There's just no way we can afford that. This is going to cost us too much money. It's going to raise our taxes. This is going to be terrible. Well, if we sit down and talk about it, I can understand that, my position is the community needs this. It would be an amenity. It would help maybe draw business to our town because they see this. The schools could partner in it. On the other side, it could be, we can't afford this. We've got other priorities, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we could do is sit down and have a conversation about that. And maybe, we need to figure out how we could finance this. Maybe we need to save up for a few years before we can build it. Maybe we need to spread it out over the course of many years with bonds to make sure the taxes don't go up too good. We could both meet the concerns of financing and the concerns of having a community gathering place. We could do both if we could sit down and have that decent conversation. So somebody comes up and says, the county spends too much money. Well, what are the underlying interests in that? It could be that they feel their taxes are too high. Could be that maybe they can't get over a bad project that happened years ago, and they're still upset about that. Maybe, perhaps they've just lost their job or have some other concerns that you don't know about that makes them feel like the county is spending too much money. Perhaps there's all kinds of underlying interests here that may need to be addressed. Here's another one. A new manufacturing facility is being proposed to be built on the edge of town. Okay? The only access is by a county road that goes through a neighborhood and right by an elementary school. There's two positions. Let's build this manufacturing facility, and there's people that say they don't. And so the question is, what are the underlying interests of each side? And so, if people had time, they'd break into small groups and start talking about this, and you'd identify things. The folks that want to build the plant are thinking about the jobs, and the tax revenue that would come into the community for that. And maybe there'd be more customers for local businesses, the grocery stores and others. The folks there don't build it are saying, well, it's going to go right in front of the elementary school. Little kids are going to be crossing. Trucks are coming by. People could get hit and hurt. It's going to be a lot of noise going right through a neighborhood. But you and I both know that the answer we could do is we could still work this out. We could build a manufacturing facility and add a lot of safety things around that school. Maybe a stoplight. Maybe the school starts a crossing patrol. Things like that. So if we knew those underlying interests and sat down, we could probably figure out a way to make it work where we could have both. You could have a safer around the elementary school and have a manufacturing plant with those jobs. And the trouble is, when we're just in one camp or the other camp, we're never going to get to those answers. Our job is to help people understand that. So what we suggest is that only proposals that include others' needs succeed. Options. So when we're developing options, you can come in with your proposal and say, I'm going to build this plant and it has nothing to do in there about school safety or anything else. Well, that's not really great. That's not a great option. It's a one-sided proposal. You brought that in the beginning. Now you've learned some things from asking questions and being open-minded, and now the question is, what are some better options? And if that proposal is going to include others' needs, then all of a sudden I'm saying, I think we should build a manufacturing plant, and I think we should do some improvements around the school with a stop sign maybe, or a stoplight, and maybe we have a speed, we slow the speed down there. The kids all start to become part of a school crossing patrol, which teaches them some accountability and responsibility. All of a sudden there's a lot of good things there. We could put those together. And all of a sudden we have the new plant and we have a growing and happy community because we listened to the neighborhood and we put some of their needs into the final mix. So just remember that when we look at trying to integrate our solutions, we have the domination. We have the, I've got a 3-2 vote and I can push it through and it's going to happen. Or sometimes you have compromise. And I would like to point out that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, 10 letters in the word compromise. Not a 4-letter word. It is something that is not bad, and sometimes it does fit for where we're at. So compromise isn't bad. But our truth is what we want to get to is we want to get to the integration. We want to get to the point where we're taking some of the ideas of both sides to the best degree we can, having good discussion, trying to see if we can't weave some of them in and make it better. Now we know that there are people at both ends that are not going to be happy. They didn't want to spend any extra money around the school to make it safer, or on the other side of that manufacturing plant, they never wanted to plant there in the first place. And so we know that when we're going to the middle here and trying to weave this together, that this is difficult work. But this is all of what our jobs are nowadays. And in these polarized times, these are the sort of paths that can get us through them instead of just a knee-jerk reaction. Now, it isn't going to work necessarily in every issue, but I would point out that it is the same kind of thing that we are continuing to try to do as a state, as a country, as a globe on things like the COVID pandemic. We know that we want to have businesses open and we want schools open, but we also know that we're worried about not really getting this thing snuffed out. And so we know there's underlying interests of safety, of economic viability, of kind of how much our healthcare system can go on. We know there's a lot of that out there. Okay, get that. And so now what we're going to do is try to start taking those interests and see what we can do to weave it together to make it work. Because we've got to make it work. We've just got to work together. So that's a little bit about this interest-based problem solving and a problem-solving mindset. I hope the message you're getting is that you need to come into this with kind of that mindset of, okay, what's going on here? I know what I see, and I know that there's viewpoints here, but what are those underlying interests? Why is this a problem for these folks? And you need to go to them. You need to have a conversation. And you say, I'm trying to learn more about what's going on. And they'll say, you don't care at all. Why are you even here? I said, listen, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry if you've gotten that impression. I know sometimes these have been tough issues, but what I want to really do is I want to learn a little more. Because I think if I can learn what your need and I can learn what our needs are, if we can have that discussion, see what's going on, maybe we can start trying to figure out some way to weave this thing together. Because it'd be a shame if it just keeps tearing our community apart. So that's the first half of our session. What we're going to do now is take a 10-minute break, and then we come back. We're going to talk about how we communicate this, how we deal with difficult public, like in a public meeting, and how we make some of these ideas kind of flow and become part of our world. So again, thank you very much. Take a break, think about the underlying interests maybe and some of the challenges you've faced in your area, either it's with a colleague or a policy issue you're dealing with. What could you have done better? How could you have maybe asked some questions and listened a little better? Because you can always improve. That's what this is always about, continuous improvement. So we're going to take a break right now. We'll be back in 10 minutes and we'll go on for another second half. Thank you very much so far.